Hey, welcome to Ask Jimmy the Dean. Today we're looking at the question, how did the Taliban take over Afghanistan so quickly? Or maybe even better, should we be surprised that the Taliban took over Afghanistan so quickly? Well, let's begin first of all by just saying, no, we shouldn't be surprised. But you might sit and go, well, why? After $1 trillion of investment, 20 years of training, 300,000 Afghan military people on the ground, being taken on by 30,000 Taliban. The numbers just don't make sense. Well, I want to suggest to you some stuff about the cultural agents at work in this story that might reveal why it happened so quickly. But first, I want to pause. One of the things about Ask Jimmy the Dean that we're trying to contribute to is slowing things down. And first of all, starting with yourself. Like, what are you experiencing when you read these headlines? Are you mad about the amount of money that was spent, right? Are you amazed at the fact that a superpower can't control or necessarily get what it would like to see happen in the nation? Or maybe you were driven by the fact that whoever you voted for in the last political race, the narrative they're putting around this is the one you want to be a part of. So I always say this, man, know where you're at in yourself. I know this, when I saw this going on, I could tell there was this whole line of thinking and theory I have around global sociology from lots of years of study and traveling in the world. And I just realized like so much of that came flooding in, and I realized that I was being driven by some hidden persuaders in myself that were pushing me, right? So all that to say, know even why you're asking this question, because if we don't, then we walk into it with such lenses on, we can't even slow down enough to see some of the basic things that might be going on that we need to look at. So that's one thing. I always want to remind us to give the benefit of the doubt to the person we might actually be disagreeing with on their angle on things. But I do want to take some time to look at some of the cultural stuff that's at work here. There's a really, really powerful study. Matter of fact, my doctoral degree works in leadership, and I was studying global leadership for some time. And one of the largest studies that was ever done on leadership was done 17,000 managers across, I think, 80 or 82 different nations. And it was studied, then proven that there's these 6 dimensions that kept showing up. In other words, we now call them the 6 dimensions of culture. And they're known as the Golf-Ofstede index. And we'll put a little link in the description here. But let me just quickly describe it to you. We were able to determine that there's 6 pieces of culture. And every nation group or every people group responds to those 6 dimensions. And so when you combine those 6 dimensions, you get what we call a cultural outworking or a cultural profile for a people. Now, one of the dimensions is called individualism versus collectivism. Individualism versus collectivism. Let me just quickly describe to you the difference. A highly individualistic culture holds a very loose view of culture. And at the end of the day, it ultimately is responsible to itself, its immediate family, and its immediate extended family. You look out for each other in that, and then your belief is if you do that well, it trickles out into a larger culture. A collectivist culture, on the other hand, that is much more based on what they call a tight societal structure, meaning that ultimately you are expecting that society is actively involved in each other's worlds, and the deep affinities across extended families drive things. So being able to agree together across multiple families and then living in high commitment to what was decided collectively across many families is the way that they would go about operating within culture. One is not better than the other. One isn't just a result of different worldviews. For instance, you can have a Christian culture that can be high on individualism and a Christian culture that's high on collectivism. You can have an Islamic culture that's the same way. So it's not necessarily based in belief system. We tend to find that it has to do with the way people groups are wired. People in their innate wiring are built more toward this individualism or collectivism approach. And then, of course, government systems can take advantage or jump on board with those things. But I share that with you because we have to remember something. We're sitting amazed that a government that we poured trillions of dollars into as the West and NATO did all the best training in Western forms of nation making that we know how to do, setting up governmental structures within a capital city within Afghanistan. We're surprised that it can tumble all of a sudden. And I'll just simply give you a hint that when it comes to the Afghanistan culture, they rank considerably lower than all the NATO allies that we're helping to try to turn them into a nation. They rank lower on the topic of individualism. Now, just to give you an example, the highest individualistic culture we know of in the world is called the United States of America, closely followed by Australia, then Great Britain. We rank a 91 out of 100 for individualism. It shows up in every aspect of our governmental and social structures. However, Afghanistan, actually the study wasn't done in Afghanistan because of the fact that the researchers couldn't get access at that time, but just in the neighboring country, for instance, of Kazakhstan, they rank as a 20 on the individuality chart. So that means it's one of the lowest nations in the world of individuality. They lean more toward collectivism. Therefore, when it comes to how you would run a country like Afghanistan, it's based much more in a very intricate network of relationships among a bunch of what you might call tribal warlord kings or queens or matriarchs or patriarchs. And the network that runs between them is what's going to define an actual governmental structure, not so much whether or not there's one sitting in a capital city. That's been structured by more individualistic thinking Western nations. So we can't be surprised that when all of the NATO forces were pulled out, that all of a sudden we had in Afghanistan an actual network that was able to come in that's much more rooted in understanding familial relationships and partnerships and alliances, and therefore it can topple the dominoes really quickly. Because what then happens is, as it's going up against a national army like the Afghan National Army, all of those Afghan soldiers have deep ties to families who actually are being run by a collectivist approach, and the Taliban knows how to work that collectivist approach a lot better. So that's why people lay down their guns and go home to their families, etc. Even if they believed in some overarching larger hope they were trying to believe for, ultimately, end of the day, in the collectivists, it's how your family and its alliances and its relationships work out. So that's how the dominoes can fall so quickly, and all of a sudden people you thought you put a new ideology into end up laying down their guns so quickly. It's not about whether they're right or wrong, bad or not bad. It has to do with the fact that the way they're wired to understand how the world unfolds. And it would do us a lot of good in the West if we're going to help nations form, to factor that into some of our thinking as we go. That's a lot to take in, but I will tell you this, when it comes back to it, it comes down to you and I thinking through where we're at in this and making sure we understand that the other person too is operating out of really sincerely out of a deep set of values and systems, and it's part of our job to make sure we understand it. So that's any questions you have from where you can send to Jimmy the Dean /ask or /subscribe if you want to keep track of what we're up to.